This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former state senator, former chairman of the Board of Education, Howard Lee, John Hood, syndicated columnist, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and former House of Representatives member Gene Arnold from Nash County. Well, this week we've got an interesting show for you. We're going to be talking about a number of things, including the governor's budget. We'll talk about the Chief Justice begging for money, and of course we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. Governor Pat McCrory unveiled his recommendations for the state budget for the next 2 years, a budget he says will encourage private sector jobs, help build our infrastructure, and fulfill promises made to starting teachers. The $21.5 billion budget is about $440 million more than the current spending plan, but most of that additional money goes to increased enrollment in public schools and Medicaid, the pay increase for teachers, and incentive money to attract new industry. But it also includes a budget cut of 2% for most state agencies and our university system. As you might expect, some praise the budget for being responsible, while critics claim the tax cuts passed over the last 2 years have forced the state to cut spending at a time when the needs are great. I want to ask all the panelists on a scale of A to F, give the governor's budget a grade and tell us what you liked and didn't like about it. Gene Arnold, we'll start with you.
Tom, I'd say a C. I do like the raises for the teachers. But this budget has no power or authority because Art Pope is gone, and we'll see what happens when it reaches the General Assembly.
Chris, give it a grade.
Well, I'll give it a D. I mean, the governor was claiming credit for, in effect, keeping state government running at the same level it was last year. As you mentioned, most of the increases, with a couple notable exceptions, were basically just paying for increased enrollment and paying for Medicaid costs and keeping with where we were. I think raising starting teacher salary to $35,000 is a good idea, but this budget gives a raise to less than 1/3 of the teachers, and many of them didn't get a raise last year. And rank and file state employees, many of them are not going to get a raise either. We still have a lot of needs. I was hoping he would try to make some progress to fill in some of these cuts that have been made recently.
John, give it a grade.
Well, Chris is right. Budget growth in this plan is quite restrained. He just messed up on the grade. That earns it at least a B, maybe a B plus. It does not roll back any of the tax cuts of the past. It does provide for spending growth that's manageable over time, sustainable over time, instead of reckless. And the reason I don't give it an A is because it assumes a higher gas tax over time, which I'm not in favor of, and it has some incentive, some targeted tax incentive or targeted spending incentive programs embedded in the budget that I don't think are a good idea.
Howard Lee, give it a grade.
I will stretch it and give it a C+.
Okay.
I think there are some interesting aspects of this budget. I do like the governor's emphasis on putting additional funds in for mental health. But I am dismayed and dislike the fact that our educational institutions are continuing to take a hit in terms of reductions in their appropriations. I think it's a budget that certainly possibly has some good features that we should try and save, and hope the legislature will.
Gene Arnold, you alluded to the fact in your opening comments about what the legislature is going to do to it. For as many years as we can remember, the governor made this big hoopla about presenting a budget. It got a little media splash. Then the legislature promptly put it on a shelf and ignored the recommendations. Is that what's going to happen with this budget? Is there any reason to believe that they might get better treatment from this legislature?
I think this budget, like any governor, as you said in the past, is an exercise in futility, because as soon as it hits the House floor or the Senate floor, it's going to be put on a shelf, and the House and the Senate will come up with their own budgets. The belief firmly entrenched in the General Assembly is that it is not the governor's job to prepare a budget. It is his job or her job to enact and fulfill what the General Assembly creates.
That raises a good point, Howard. For as long as I can remember, the governor has always come forward at the beginning of every biennial session and presented a budget. Is it constitutional or is it just tradition?
I think it's traditional, probably more than anything else, but I frankly believe that This year, the legislature will have a little bit different attitude toward the governor's budget than it did in the last 2 years. This is coming up on an election year, and these folk are not stupid, and they certainly don't want to get in a fight with their governor, and they don't want to put him in an embarrassing position of acting as if he's so weak they don't respect what he's trying to offer.
John Lee Roberts, the state budget director, said that the revenues are coming in better this past week, said revenues are coming in better than they were earlier in the year, and estimates we're only $158 million short of what was projected compared to, what was it, $271 million last month. Even so, the governor says things are tight. Is he being too conservative?
No, it's better to err on the side of caution rather than the side of abandon. Not only is the current revenue picture better than it was a month ago, but it's much better than it was predicted to be last fall when a bunch of panicky people, some of them just partisans, trying to make mischief, but some of them just not reading numbers very closely were projecting it's $1 billion shortfall and this, that, and the other. Utter nonsense. If you look at February, what people predicted was what actually happened. They changed the tax code in a way that people have higher withholding during the year. They're keeping more of their own money, but that also means they're not getting as large refunds at the end of the year, and that's what we're seeing now. It is possible in March and April that the gap for 2014-15 would close even more. Yeah.
Chris, we talked about after the governor made the State of the State speech that he was recommending 2 new cabinet-level positions, Department of Veteran Affairs and a Department of Information Technology. What do you think the legislature is going to do with that?
I don't know. The military one might be hard to oppose on political grounds, although I sort of will be surprised if they take those recommendations that seriously. I think the bigger issue really is the 2 bond issues that he's proposing, and we're going to talk about transportation in the next several weeks on this show because it's one of the biggest issues that will define this session. I thought that was interesting, that, of course, that both of those were in there. I do want to make one more comment about the budget. You know, Governor McCrory, when he first came to office, had some things that were his own in there. He, I think, courageously said we need to restart the North Carolina drug treatment courts, which were very successful. He gave that up. He hasn't tried that again. And so I think one of the things this budget doesn't have is something that doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to rhyme, but some imprint of McCrory on it, something that he believes in.
The governor's initiative.
Right, a governor's initiative or something that he really feels strongly about, and I didn't really sense that from him this time.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking budgets quite frequently as the spring goes on. If you like NC Spin and want more, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or NC Spin on Facebook. We have exclusive video footage you can't get anywhere else. Plus, you can read perspectives from opinion leaders across our state. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State on ncspin.com or NC Spin on Facebook or at NC Spin Tweets. When we come back, the Chief Justice says the courts are underfunded.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
The Legal Workforce Act is a bad idea. Forcing mandatory E-Verify before creating a 21st century guest worker program is bad for agriculture and it's bad for our economy. Wasting crops, closing farms, and importing our food are not acceptable consequences. We expect better. We must solve our current workforce needs first, tell Congress to fix our broken immigration system the right way.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
Every year, North Carolina patients undergo 635,000 same-day surgeries. 72% of these surgeries are performed in our highest-cost hospital facilities, adding as much as $2,000 to every procedure. The state's outdated Certificate of Need law prevents competition from lower-cost, higher-quality same-day surgery centers, inflating healthcare costs and limiting patient choice. Tell state lawmakers it's time to lower healthcare costs now. It's time to make a simple fix to an outdated law, increasing patient choice and lowering healthcare costs now. You can help. Visit reformconnow.com and tell lawmakers it's time for a simple fix to an outdated law. It's time to lower healthcare costs now.
We now return to NC Spin.
Mark Martin, Chief Justice of North Carolina Supreme Court, was invited to address a joint session of the General Assembly. Told lawmakers the courts need $30 million more in funding to address what he calls an underfunded and understaffed court system. Over the past 6 years, the Administrative Office of the Courts has seen a 41% reduction in operating budgets, resulting in a 10% reduction in staff. Martin says about 1% of our tax dollars go toward our court system, below the national average, and it results in delayed justice, a backlog of cases, and more dismissals. Howard Lee, every Supreme Court justice that we know anything about has complained about insufficient funding for the courts, but this is the first time a Supreme Court Chief Justice has been invited since I. Beverly Lake did so in 2001. Does that send a signal that the lawmakers might be more willing to provide funding now that a Republican is the Chief Justice?
Well, I think it's a good sign. And, of course, I have a lot of respect for Chief Justice Martin. I thought he made a very effective speech. He laid out what I think justification for the needs. And, of course, we haven't just started denying the court resources. It's been going on for a number of years and across both party lines. So I think the legislature may be more open because I thought he made a very strong case for increased funding.
Following that thread, the Chief Justice says 41% over the last 6 years in reductions. Okay, this is more than other state agencies have experienced during this period of time. Is it because the legislature doesn't like their decisions or what, Gene?
I think it's a matter of they don't really know what is going on in the court system or how much it is backed up. I know our good friend Toby Fitch, every time he convenes court and he's the judge in the Superior Court, he goes back and empties the jail and find people that have been in jail 18 months and almost 2 years that their case has never gone to trial. So there is a need. It's almost a desperate need, but I really don't believe the General Assembly is aware of what's going on.
Well, the General Assembly and the public, Chris, what do you think the public would say if they found out about the number of cases where the charges were either reduced or dismissed altogether?
Well, I think they'd be upset. I think they'd be upset and should be if there are people in our jails waiting, 6, 8, 9, 10 months for a trial, which means that they haven't even been proven guilty yet and they're still there. I thought it was interesting that Mark Martin, the Chief Justice, gave a speech to the General Assembly. The next day, the governor's budget came out that just recommended a fraction of what the Chief Justice asked the General Assembly for. And, they've just not been funding the courts. They've actually been reducing the funding to the courts. The last year, they cut technology funding to the courts. The one thing, maybe the most desperate need, we have courts and the computers can't even talk to each other, and people are going free or not getting their trials set up. And it's a crisis, and I think we ought to call it that. And the Chief Justice, I hope, will convince lawmakers finally to do the right thing.
Along those lines, we talked about the governor's budget. Chris was right. The governor recommended $16 million more
over 2 years.
Instead of the $30 million that you think the governor just didn't know what the Chief Justice was going to recommend, or he felt like that was all he could do?
I think probably more the latter than the former, but I think the General Assembly will come in at a higher number. To go up to 30 is not exactly to break the bank. We're not talking about hundreds of millions of dollars kind of expenditure. I think it's very likely the legislature will listen and do more, and I think they should. This is an area that there is a lot of evidence now that in general state spending from current levels does not have much effect on economic growth. States that spend more on education don't necessarily get better results and so forth. There is an exception, which is criminal justice and public safety. That's an area where there is pretty clear empirical evidence that most states, and North Carolina among them, invests versus the need.
Well, in addition to that, though, we are seeing a growth in the number of cases that our court system is having to deal with, and that just compounds the problem. So is it the general consensus the legislature is probably going to cough up the additional $30 million? We'll go around the horn real quick.
I think they'll come close to it, if not fund the full $30 million, and I certainly hope they do.
Chris?
I hope so too, but I will believe it when I see it.
You're a doubting Christopher, is that it?
I am.
John?
I'd say come closer to, not necessarily get all the way to 30.
I tend to agree. I'm a very optimistic person on this one, and I frankly have a lot of faith that the Chief Justice will work this as hard as any Chief Justice has, and that will make a difference.
After these messages, we're going to talk about the fracking that goes into effect this week.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Where do you go when you need to know? ANC makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? ANC members can tell you. Just use the ANC member directory as your guide or call us directly. ANC members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
Medicaid system is not a perfect system. There are things that could be changed, but there's a lot that's going well with the system. Community Care of North Carolina is in place. It's a team of nurses, advisors, caregivers who help us out. We want to call and say, look, I've got Miss So-and-so here. She needs to have her weight checked each day because she's got congestive heart failure. Can you send one of those monitors out to the house and keep an eye on this and let me know if her weight goes up too much, because if it does, she's retaining fluid and she's going to be back in the hospital. We work together with them. That's a great system. It saves a lot of money. It's proven to work. We're not opposed to changing the things that need to be changed, but let's not throw out everything that we worked for the past 15 to 20 years.
North Carolina's Family Physicians supports Medicaid reform that builds on our state's foundation of medical homes. OurNCHealthcare.com.
Does your North Carolina business or organization have a story to tell? I'm Richard Campbell, and at Carolina Broadcasting and Publishing, we help tell stories that connect you to the people who will respond. We take the time to understand our clients' needs and what makes them unique. We craft their stories through the efficient use of words, images, and videos that resonate with their desired audience. We also know that a good story is incomplete without a call to action. On video, on air, online, and in print, from concept to final production, no one can help tell your story more effectively or affordably than we can. For special introductory offers, visit carolinabroadcasting.com or call 919-832-1416. Again, that's carolinabroadcasting.com. Let us help tell your story today.
We now return to NC Spin.
On Wednesday of this coming week, the state's new fracking rules go into effect. This has been a controversial proposal from the get-go, but it got even more so with a last-minute House amendment that was passed, then voted down, and then later passed again. Representative Mike Hager, sponsor of the amendment, said it was a technical fix, but environmentalists quickly said it would effectively roll back air quality rules relating to hydraulic fracturing. Chris, Hager's one of the Republican House caucus leaders, but enough members of his own caucus voted against it in what was considered a defeat for House leadership. Was this a case where they were trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes or cram something down their throats, or what?
It certainly looked like it. There's sort of two issues here. One is the issue itself, which we should talk about, but I actually think that it's a pretty telling window into the dysfunction that is that the North Carolina House of Representatives. Hager's not just one of the leaders. He's the elected majority leader, the number 2 ranking really person, the leader of the House caucus. And he walked in, he said later, somebody in the Senate handed him this amendment you're talking about. So he proposed it without doing any work, without getting people to sign off on it. And as you mentioned, a lot of members of his own caucus who elected him to be their leader rejected him in an open House session.
First they voted for it and then came back on second reading.
Right, but there's a lot of discussion that there's a lot of fracturing in the House leadership. There's not a lot of communication between even the Speaker's office sometimes and the majority leader.
A nice play on words.
Right. I mean, I think this is it's a window into what the House better straighten out, or it's going to be a long year.
Gene, as far as it goes, this amendment said that the Environmental Management Commission could establish air quality rules, or it wiped away that provision. And instead, it allowed the commission to either use the existing federal regulations or state regulations. That doesn't sound much like a technical fix to me, is it?
No, and what's going to happen, I predict, we're going to have a huge scandal that's going to be similar to the coal ash, because these people are able to put hydraulics into the ground. They will not tell you what chemicals they're using. They're going to get into the water, and eventually you're going to have a big problem. And in 5 counties to do this fracturing, I don't think is going to generate enough gas or oil or water, for that matter, to come out of the ground to be significant enough to put money into it.
That raises a really good question. With the lower price of gasoline today and the uncertainty and high cost of this drilling, a lot of people have been speculating that we could issue all the permits in the world. We just aren't going to see a lot of drilling going on.
Well, I don't think we will. I think certainly the legislatures who are leading this effort haven't done a lot of homework to try and better understand both the pros and the cons and what possible outcomes this could be. So I really don't think we're going to have this great flood of people coming in and drilling and providing all these resources we thought would be there.
So, John, after they defeated this amendment, the House Republican caucus went back together and they had a little prayer meeting and come to Jesus meeting and so forth like that. Later trotted it out separately, and it was passed. What's the Senate going to do with it?
I think since the idea may well have originated in the Senate, I would think that it might be favorably handled in the Senate. You know, the opponents of fracking have got to think through, I mean, which one is it? Is this some gigantic environmental disaster in the making, which kind of presupposes there's lots of stuff going to happen? Or is it irrelevant because the price of oil and gas is too low and there's not enough reserve and therefore there won't be much drilling? One or the other. But you can't have an environmental disaster when there's no drilling.
Well, and I'll tell you what it is that we thought for a while there was, everybody told us, then Bob Rucho and others stood on the Senate floor and said this is going to be the economic salvation of North Carolina. It's going to create thousands of jobs and bring in hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. Clearly that's not going to happen. And the big oil companies aren't coming here because there's not a lot of supply. So the danger is we are going to have problems because the companies are coming in are the wildcatters who are willing to take risks, not follow the rules, and I think that's one of the biggest fears, and that's why these this amendment that Hager put on is so dangerous.
You mean the problem is that we just don't have enough gigantic oil companies that
no, the problem is that there's no supply. There's not enough supply under there, and we're not going to have the enforcement mechanism.
If there's no supply under there, who's going to fund all these evil wildcatters to go drilling?
You'll see.
Come on.
Well, we'll see how many permits get issued and how much drilling goes on, and I'm sure we'll talk about it.
I thought it was going to be a big economic boost. That was what we were sold.
Plus you got a pipeline coming in, particularly in our section of gas. And if Obama ever leaves office and we get the pipeline approved, there's another 7 that you don't need.
And one other quick thing, where's the wastewater going to go? We still don't know where all the wastewater, when we do drill, is going to be generated. Nobody wants it.
It's a faucet.
It's a puzzlement, as Yul Brynner once said. Okay, after these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Hi, I'm Linda Loveland. I want the best for my kids. Feeding them foods they like within my budget is a priority. But what do we really know about these foods? North Carolina farmers and food experts give you a website to find it all. FeedTheDialogueNC.com, a place where moms like you and me can learn more about the foods we eat and the farmers that feed us. Check it out. Add your input and help feed the dialogue. Let's talk food at FeedTheDialogueNC.com.
Nobody ever imagined a mammogram machine being subject to CON law. If I want to invest our business dollars into technology that I think is going to benefit my patients, my customers, we should be able to do that. I think it's time to take a law that was intended to protect the citizens of North Carolina and now is harming them and change it. I'm Dr. Bruce Schroeder, and I support CON reform.
Visit reformconnow.com.
Medicaid system is not a perfect system. There are things that could be changed, but there's a lot that's going well with the system. Community Care of North Carolina is in place. It's a team of nurses, advisors, caregivers who help us out. We want to call and say, look, I've got Miss So-and-so here. She needs to have her weight checked each day because she's got congestive heart failure. Can you send one of those monitors out to the house and keep an eye on this and let me know if her weight goes up too much, because if it does, she's retaining fluid and she's going to be back in the hospital. We work together with them. That's a great system. It saves a lot of money. It's proven to work. We're not opposed to changing the things that need to be changed, but let's not throw out everything that we worked for the past 15 to 20 years.
North Carolina's Family Physicians supports Medicaid reform that builds on our state's foundation of medical homes. OurNCHealthcare.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
Now we come to the best part of the show, in my opinion, when we ask the panelists to tell us something we don't know. They get to choose the topic and sound off on it for a few seconds. Chris, I'm going to start with you.
Well, there's a report out a while back by a coalition of national health groups that looked at how North Carolina and other states are spending the tobacco settlement from 1998. We are spending 1.2% of it on smoking prevention. This ranks 47th in the country. Our teen smoking rate is 15%. Florida,
you did a good column on that.
Thank you. Florida, a state run by a Republican governor, is spending $66 million a year. Their teen smoking rate is 7.5%. Imagine the lives and the money we could save if we could get our teen smoking rate to half of what it is now, like Florida. And not enough folks are talking about this. The General Assembly, I think, needs to put more of the tobacco settlement in trying to stop kids from smoking.
Peg O'Connell will love you forever. Tell us something we don't know, Gene Arnold.
Well, the first time ever in the United States this fall, there will be more minority and non-Hispanic whites registered to go to school. Now, what that says to me is that this proves we need a reform in education policy and how these schools are run.
Interesting. Howard Lee, tell us something we don't know.
This is more personal, but a hero of mine passed away recently, Claude Sitton. Claude Sitton is someone who grew up very near where I grew up. He grew up in Conyers, Georgia, and I grew up in Lithonia. And we often had the joke that we both had to come up north to make good. But he was a real strong advocate for human rights and equal rights, and I thought a great pioneer and someone with great courage. And certainly we can learn a lot from a person like Claude Sitton.
Sitton ran the News and Observer newsroom with an iron fist. I mean, to tell you, what was it, from 68 until something
90 to the 90s?
Yeah, into the 90s. Yeah. If Claude didn't bless it, it didn't run. John, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, some weeks ago on this show and I guess elsewhere, there was a sort of joking notion advanced of a big switch in 2016, trying to persuade Roy Cooper to run for the U.S. Senate against Richard Burr instead of governor, and therefore being able to maybe recruit Kay Hagan to run for governor. I thought this was sort of a joke, but I've heard recently that some Democrats, frustrated with an inability to get Kay Hagan to commit to run against Burr again, and somewhat disappointed with some of the polling in the governor's race, are actively pursuing. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there are Democrats that are actually arguing this would be the best strategy.
Well, wait a minute. So Roy Cooper has been the presumptive candidate to run against Pat McCrory for governor. You're now saying that might not happen.
The argument is that if Hagan runs for Senate again in just 2 years, it'll be sort of like Erskine Bowles. You've just seen her. You said no to her. Why would you say no to her again? Whereas if she is convinced to run for governor, she sort of was running for governor in 2014. She talked mostly about state issues, and that the Attorney General might be a better U.S. Senate candidate.
All right, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed during the week, read our column. Be sure to visit ncspin.com, and we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the state of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.